All right. So this is the meeting on the Housing First Subcommittee of the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development. The Housing First Subcommittee meeting has now commenced. It's September 28th at 4 p.m. This meeting is being held virtually due to COVID-19 to allow for social distancing and protect the public health. As we continue our efforts in meeting remotely, we ask all commissioners and guests to mute yourselves until called upon to speak to avoid feedback and background noise. For those who have dialed in using the call-in number, to unmute to speak, dial *6 on your phone. Also, prior to speaking, please announce who you are to identify yourself. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. We ask that you only use the chat function to request to speak or to announce that you are leaving the meeting so that we can track quorum. Also, in order to comply with state open meeting law, attendance and votes will be done by way of roll call using audio, not by using the chat function. Looks like Mindy's here, so we do have quorum. Due to open meeting law, only those items on the agenda will be addressed at this meeting. Action may be taken on any item. For meeting support such as Spanish language translation or sign language interpretation, please call Ernesto Portillo. His phone number is on the agenda as well as his email address. Please allow ample time to make these arrangements. All right. Next item on the agenda is call to audience. Any members of the audience would like to speak, please feel free to raise your hand and I can call upon you. All right. There being no members of the audience, I'm going to move on to a presentation by Miranda Schubert of Tucson for Everyone.
Thanks, Liz, and thanks for giving me time on the agenda. I'm not sure if I have screen sharing ability, but I did put together a few slides just to try to keep myself focused.
Miranda, I want to make you co-host.
Thank you.
We can see your screen. Thank you.
Yes,
cool.
I can see it.
Okay, cool. All right, so I just thought that maybe I could start off by giving a little bit of background about how this even got started. So I want to say that I had been thinking about housing prior to running for Ward 6 seat on City Council, but really in the process of campaigning and knocking on doors and talking to a wide array of voters from across the city, I started to hear recurring themes about housing, concerns about affordable housing, and noticing that these were folks who sort of held like a wide array of different views along the political spectrum, but still sharing this commonality. And there was one forum in particular where an attendee specifically like directly messaged me and asked if I was in favor of abolishing R1 zoning, and I had no idea what he was talking about. And so he shared an article with me about Minneapolis 2040. And the article, really my biggest takeaway from it was that it's kind of a roadmap as to how to enact big changes, big policy changes in communities that are maybe initially resistant to those changes. So sort of how did we start to move the needle on this and actually get this done? I will say that like I'm less clear as to how Minneapolis 2040 is unfolding now, but the basic idea was that getting rid of single family zoning would be a huge step toward alleviating the housing crisis. So I learned about exclusionary zoning, and it was just kind of a wormhole into learning more about different conversations that were going on within housing justice circles. So then, you know, I had like local influences, and I would say the ADU ordinance and discussions around that was kind of a catalyzing influence, but I had already been talking to folks. And in retrospect, you know, largely women of color who work in housing in different ways, kind of bringing up the same issues, the same themes about obstacles to enacting changes to policies that we know are problematic, you know, things that, you know, things like redlining, zoning that, you know, perpetuates racial segregation, things like that, like these commonly held like truths that just weren't seeming to actually find their way to policy. Noticing whose perspectives are prioritized. So like locally, I was also kind of tuning in more to conversations that were going on about housing and noticing that there seemed to be a disproportionate representation of certain folks. You know, for example, I feel like renters are often passed over in these conversations. Folks who have the privilege to stay within their neighborhoods for a really long time and have like resource-rich neighborhoods with associations tend to be more able to show up to meetings and provide input, and they feel more empowered to participate. A lot of folks feel uncomfortable, it can be intimidating, and so I also noticed this kind of phenomenon and thought, wouldn't it be great if like we could make this less scary for people and make people feel empowered to weigh in on conversations that impact them directly. And then the other impulse behind wanting to start this chapter had to do with wanting to be collaborative and breaking down like binary divisions between activism and governance, and wanting to partner for solutions rather than just say no, you know, just kind of a yes and approach. So you know, it was kind of like an idea that was percolating in my brain, and I sort of reached out to different folks and got a sense for if they thought it was a good idea. And then when the ADU discussion started happening, you know, that was when we decided to launch the chapter and get a petition going and start putting out information in an effort to educate folks and get them involved in the conversation. So just a little bit about like how I approach organizing in issues. Usually there's you know, an initial awareness of an issue or an idea, like, wow, you know, there's not enough housing for people, or more and more folks are getting priced out of areas that are close to services and opportunities. Crowdsourcing, okay, so then my next step after the initial awareness is, who do I know who would know about this? What are my subject matter experts that I'm connected with? Or who can connect me to people who know? That moves on to other research, critical questions. How are the bigger picture objectives being reflected in this specific issue? Who does it benefit and why? And is it a defensible position? So I mean, that was like a deliberation that like I definitely went through with the ADU ordinance. Like, is this something I'm willing to jump into? And ultimately, you know, we decided to, and our petition gathered, I think, close to 400 signatures, which I think demonstrated that you know, a perspective like needed to be expressed and maybe hadn't been already. So it's been almost a year since we launched the ADU ordinance conversations. So we launched in October of 2021. Just to back up a little bit to a bird's eye view of in my backyard, it's kind of like something that I see more and more acronyms about lately. Like sensible in my backyard. So SIMBY, I've seen public housing in my backyard. NIMBY is, you know, kind of like the infamous moniker. And of course, nobody calls themselves NIMBY. And then YIMBY is yes in my backyard. So it's a basic, I would say like the most basic way to sum it up is YIMBY employs a collaborative, strategic kind of yes and approach. That says, okay, there may be some things that we need to compromise on, but ultimately what we need to do is increase housing stock at all levels. And NIMBYism primarily employs just more of an oppositional, this is problematic, and not necessarily always wanting to partner. And there's so much nuance within those categories. There's actually an article that I'd be happy to share with any of you that breaks down the ways that YIMBY and NIMBY groups fall along the political spectrum. So there's conservative YIMBY chapters across the US, and there's also more leftist ones, which is what our local one is. So we're in favor of things like rent control, overhauling public housing, believing that housing is a human right and shouldn't be commodified, believing in land back and other restorative efforts. But you know, there's also neoliberal YIMBYism, which says that like the market's going to fix it if we just like build more. So I think it's always worth not making like big generalizations when you're digging into stuff, and not like assuming that you know what people are going to think. because I started this chapter and assumed that folks that I agree with on 99.9% of issues would be jazzed about this, and like that totally wasn't the case. So it's definitely been a learning process. Also within the first year, another issue that we engaged with was transportation. So we advocated with the RTA Citizens Advisory Committee. They had to do quite a bit of work in order to be able to have their governing principles revisited. It was a whole thing where they just wanted to.
Sorry to interrupt. Can everyone please make sure they're muted? Sorry about that, Miranda. Please continue.
Oh, sorry. Anyways, so the Citizens Advisory Committee for the RTA wanted to do things like make sure that equity, climate change, and things like that were prioritized, that we were moving away from autocentric like planning and recognizing the need for more bicycle and pedestrian safety. It was just like such a push to actually get those codified into their guiding principles. And so we joined in efforts to sort of call into the RTA to say, hey, let the Citizens Advisory Committee represent the citizens. We also advocated for free public transit, and we are advocates for finding a way to permanently fund free public transit, seeing that as a public good. And that was another case where we campaigned around an issue that was like very popular. Like there's a lot of buy-in in our community for this kind of thing. Other like major campaigns that we've engaged with this year, Stop the Sweeps. So really trying to promote awareness of not wanting to criminalize folks just for being homeless, and trying to look for other solutions beyond just like cleaning up camps and moving people. And source of income protection is a more recent one. We're a member organization of the Tucson Alliance for Housing Justice, and I'm also on the steering committee for that effort. The Splinter Collective is the local nonprofit that is the sponsor organization, and the Alliance for Housing Justice has also received grants from the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona and the LGBTQ Alliance for a 0% revolving loan program for BIPOC and queer communities, I believe. And so we're just like actively trying to engage in coalition building efforts with different organizations around broad issues, like wanting to promote the idea that like homelessness is a humanitarian issue, and we need to like not allow arrests and sweeps to continue, things like that. And then just some goals. When I think about like why have something like this, why have a group like this, I think a big goal is just helping more people feel empowered to participate in different groups and neighborhood associations, to show up to meetings and tune in, to reach out to their council members, to gain a better understanding of like why decisions are happening and how they can play a role. And also, I think making it a more fun and enjoyable space to engage in. Like we've had a couple of informal like mixer events where it's just sort of like a meet and greet kind of a thing. And it was so nice to be in different spaces, like a public park, or we tabled at St. Charles, and it's like, this is great. We're just hanging out and connecting with each other and having a nice time. And we're also talking about these really serious issues, and like, what are some things that we think should be done, and what would we support? And just trying to find an expression for things that I think pretty much everybody's frustrated with. Like I haven't come across anyone who thinks that things are doing well, or that homelessness isn't a problem. And it's like, well, so what are we going to do about it then? So thanks for giving me the time to talk to you a little bit about our group. I don't know if like this really addressed the subjects that you wanted. So if you have additional questions, yeah, definitely interested in talking more.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Miranda. I'm gonna go ahead and see if anyone has any questions for her. Sorry, I'm playing with my fidget toy and it's probably making sense. If anyone has any questions for Miranda, go ahead. I have a few questions and comments myself.
Just a quick one, maybe. Miranda, you have just the Facebook page, right? Is that correct?
We also have an Instagram and we're working on a website.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mindy, go for it.
Thank you. I think my name's Mindy. I am one of the commission members. A sentence that you just said caught my attention regarding the homelessness and the sweep and around, finding alternatives, besides just the sweep and move, or sweep and I think there was another word you used.
Arrest? Was it arrest maybe?
Yeah, sweep and arrest.
Yeah.
So, just to clarify, I think that we had gone through what the demographics of our homeless population, people that are homeless, living homelessly, that, and Liz, correct me, I think that like 40% were individuals with serious mental illness, another 20% were individuals with substance use disorders, 11% were veterans. Do you have the number, like some demographic information about who are?
Yeah, so the Tucson FEMA collaboration to end homelessness does have their PIT and HIT counts, which is point in time counts of people who are living on the street on that date. And then there's also HIT, which is the housing inventory count. Both of those count people who are living in a homeless status, which would be living literally on the street in transitional housing or emergency shelter, like Salvation Army, something like that, as well as, did I say transitional housing, which is available for no more than, I think, 48 months, 24 months. I think it's 2 years. Yeah, 2 years. Let me pull those numbers.
That'd be good. So the plan, my place of being on the subcommittee is the humanitarian crisis that I see happening across the nation with, specifically for me, it's people with serious mental illnesses and substance use disorders that are living without treatment or support. And not only the lack of housing, but the diminishing amount of funds that are being distributed to the states and cities to provide the services necessary. And all I'm seeing right now is Band-Aid and revolving door. And I am searching for a very quick term solution for for what we have been tolerating. Somehow our society is tolerating our vulnerable citizens to be living homelessly and without treatment. And that I find that appalling. And I find that that's why I joined the commission, because I want to see change happen with that. So you have to build before you, like, we need to get housing built. And not, one of the thoughts that I had was there's an empty hospital, the Tucson Heart Hospital up on Stone, all single occupancy rooms with a, now not working, but a commercial kitchen and everything else that you would need. And so I was just wondering if there would be a way to get some energy behind renovating that facility where a few hundred people could quickly be placed in a housing first concept.
Yeah, I think ideas like that are super popular. Like, it's something that I hear all different people bring up all the time, and it's like, okay, so then why aren't we doing that? And then also thinking about things like, what other resources are folks going to need access to? Because it's not housing first without all the other wraparound services that they need to support them. And so like, how do we do that? Like, well, I feel like a really good first step is building broad coalition and all getting together and putting our heads together toward the same efforts, because we're all bringing different expertise to the table. And so instead of like focusing on the ways that we disagree, going, that's a rad idea. I may really not even like you or whatever. I may disagree on these other things very sharply, but on this, let's get together and figure out how to utilize this underused space and actually help people, because it is a humanitarian crisis and you're definitely not alone in seeing it that way. I think there's just like a sense of like, what else? And there are neighborhoods out there that really feel that, and they're not wrong to like want a park where they feel safe, but some of the ways that folks talk about, well, we just need to like, you know, get the police over to like get rid of that person, take care of it. Like, well, they're not trash, they're human. Like they, you know, like just trying to flip that around and think about, well, what do we need to be investing in instead? It's not more ways to punish people for being outside. And so, and I believe in trickle up policy, because it's like on the federal level, it's true that like if they don't pour a bunch of more money into housing, it's not going to work. But like, I think starting to build broad coalition and really engaging voters across the spectrum is a really great way to start to like vote people out, vote people in, empower different people to run who are standing for better ideas like rent control and public housing and things like that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mindy. Do you have any other questions for Miranda?
I think that we need to also be thinking about one of the reasons why we have, for me, I mean, there's many reasons for me that for-profit insurance companies across the nation are being given responsibility to provide funding for indigent care. And in Tucson specifically, I've watched our behavioral health care systems. I've worked in the system since 1986. So I've watched every, you know, all the iterations of, and I know what works. I've seen it, I've done it, worked with people who had been revolving door in the hospital, developing relationships, figuring out why, how. Some of this is, I think, perpetuated with the difficulty in getting people who are not aware that they are ill, involuntarily committed, which is very difficult to do. And in our system now, even if somebody does get committed, there's not enough resources to follow that person after they stabilize with, and we've got a big issue. And if you can help, I think we need to change our commitment laws. I think we need to robustly fund our citizens that are vulnerable, that, you know, a lot of us with mental illnesses did not want to be identified as vulnerable adults. So when our brains take over our decision-making, we are.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think about how isolated people are, you know, and like that community building is also a really healing thing to sort of get together with like-minded folks who also want to help make the world a better place. Like the community has to see folks who are suffering from serious mental illness and out on the street as their neighbor. Like, you know, that person's name, that's your neighbor. Like that's a person that you should try to help today, like bring them some water, you know, it's not their fault that you feel unsafe around them, you know?
That's a Band-Aid.
I know it's just a Band-Aid, but I think we need Band-Aids and at the same time working on long-term solutions. There's kind of a sense of needing to do yes and like everything at the same time, like short-term and also working on long-term. Because like today, it's like they do need water and also, you know.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mindy. I'm going to move on to Joe. Looks like he has his hand.
Sure. Hi, Miranda.
Hey, Joe.
Full disclosure, I did work with Miranda on her campaign and advised a little bit with there. So we've had lots of these housing discussions over the last few years. And I think, one of the things when we talk about somebody saying, I feel like it's kind of the next door kind of poster attitude that somebody needs to take care of this. That too often that gets interpreted as move people around. And what's missing is the care and take care of this. That we're talking about people who need help. They need somebody to care about that situation and them. So it's always refreshing to hear that take on those circumstances. Now, when you started the chapter, I know I had a lot of questions, and I wasn't quite sure. We had talked about Minneapolis 2040 and how I also feel the takeaway is really should be about how organizing people around concepts and around housing policy, whatever your housing policy may be, that there are great lessons about that. I think one of the perils of touting the 2040 policy as something that says it's getting rid of R1 or getting rid of single family zoning is that it's a suite of policies, a lot of which are really good, and a lot of which I know I've said I think are more impactful than discarding R1 and are going to make a much better influence. And if all we say is, oh yeah, Minneapolis got rid of single family zoning, we're going to miss out on those policies. We're not going to get the good impacts of Minnesota 2040. I also know when you started out, you were a chap kind of affiliated with YIMBY Action. Are you still kind of a chapter of YIMBY Action?
Yeah.
Okay. Now I know that I kind of looked at that website at the time, and I went through what they had, the section on solutions, which I had a lot of disagreements with. But your statement was kind of, we don't have to adhere to those. We can make our own kind of suite of policies that isn't exactly going to correspond with YIMBY Action or isn't going to correspond with what a lot of the YIMBY movement out of California has meant. And I hope that that's happening, because a lot of that, I think, whether it's in person or online, there are issues with the culture around it. I think when we talk about policy, it kind of ends up, like you said, there are conservative and more progressive kind of sides of the YIMBY movement. And I think it's hard for me to square what it means then, if that's the case. Because as far as I've been able to tell, that, the things that really end up being the hallmarks of what seem like YIMBY policy is deregulation, an emphasis to build at all levels of housing, which doesn't focus on the affordability enough, in my opinion. But where is there somewhere we can see which of those policies are your Tucson chapter is adopting? Is that something that you're working on for the webpage? Is that why the webpage is going to be? Because that's where all that's going to be?
Yeah, I feel like there's like a lot that I want to respond to. I want to make sure I get all of it. Like the stuff about Minneapolis 2040, I totally agree with you. And I do think that there's a danger in referring to it as this big success story. And I do have the same takeaway you do about it. And I also believe that I think it caught my interest, the way that the question was posed to me about abolishing R1 zoning. And it was an alluringly simple idea, we just do this sweeping thing and it fixes it. And it's would that it were so simple, right? No, there needs to be a whole host of other interventions and policies and really thoughtful ways of preventing displacement, preventing additional harm to communities that have already been oppressed and pushed to the margins and made to live next to landfills and highways, right? In terms of so the website policy issue, we're a very decentralized chapter. I'm the chapter lead, and I'm the person who puts out the content on Instagram. And we have a loose network of folks that are in communication with each other, but it's not like we have a board or bylaws or anything more firm like that in terms of infrastructure. And frankly, I'm not super focused on YIMBY action as something that provides a map, like a policy map, as much as like sort of a guiding idea, which says yes to more housing, which says yes, like yes to more neighbors, and to innovative solutions. I don't really recall getting too many specific policy directives when I looked at their website. I'm not really paying that much attention to it, to be honest. I think that if you want an orientation as to like what our policies would be, taking a look at the campaigns and the issues that we have rallied around and the messaging that we put out, I think sends a very clear message as to our position. And I'd love to work more on that, but you know, it takes like more people getting involved. It's a volunteer effort. I feel like there was something else that you mentioned in there too that I wanted to respond to. Are there specific things, Joe, that you've like come across? Like, I mean, the whole like build at any cost and just deregulation. Like, I guess I just want to say that I think that there's like a spectrum. You know, I mean, there does need to be some recognition that some of these regulations aren't unnecessarily constrictive, and they do disproportionately impact folks that we want to be able to build, to be able to develop like smaller scale local business owners, things like that. So there's like a spectrum of like deregulation. There's a spectrum of being willing to work with for-profit developers, not all of whom are bad people. You know, I don't know if that answers any of those concerns.
There was one other thing I kind of wanted to ask about. I think, you know, in a few forums, I've talked that the International Journal of Urban and Regional Research had a suite of papers in the intervention section. They published it online in December, and I think it made it into the March issue. Otherwise, had you had a chance to look at those, and did you have any? It's like 6 papers, so I know it's hard to say. Do you have a response to that when that is a really broad set of opinions and topics? But I'd be interested in if you read that and if you had any quick thoughts.
I haven't, but I want to, and I want to have thoughts about it. Yeah, I'm very interested. Yeah,
check it out. It's pretty broad. Like somebody was trying to Houston me the other day. It's like, oh, one of these papers is actually people from Texas Southern and in Houston about Houston, and it's got Wood and Elvin Wiley and Elliot Trevor, a few of them. They're all pretty good.
Because Houston housed 25,000 people who were still in their housing 2 years later. Like that's an incredible scale.
Housing first, bringing it back to this actual meeting, right? Houston has a great housing first program, from what I understand. That they're really dedicated to it. They're funding it well. They've got really good consistent outreach. I think the Housing First program is making all the difference in Houston, even though, you know, the affordability over there has, you know, the prices have gone up a lot there, even though Houston is often touted as a place that has, calling it unzoned isn't exactly right, but a place with less zoning restriction is certainly accurate. And so Houston's seen a lot of issues with affordability. Houston has real issues with racial segregation and disparate impacts around those things too. And that's a lot of what some of what that paper is.
Awesome, Joe. Can you send a link to that study that you mentioned to either Ernesto or myself, and we can pass it along?
Oh yeah, sure. I'll give you the link to. I think the trouble is it may be paywalled at this point online, but for those who have access to perhaps an academic library, you can get them from the U of A. And Liz, if you want them, I have the PDFs too, and I'll share them with you illicitly to get around the paywall.
Yeah, if anyone ever needs me to exploit the thousands of dollars I'm spending on my degree, please let me know, because I would love to make it.
You'll have access. Exploit them yourself.
Awesome. Joe, do you have anything else?
Sorry, Miranda, if you, I imagine you probably still have access, but if you need any of that, let me know. Let me know too, because I'm interested in hearing. I thought there's a lot of good points. Like, what's the other side? What is the YIMBY rebuttal to this? Sorry, go ahead, Liz.
That was actually, I was going to talk a little bit about NIMBYism myself, if that is all right. Cool. So I did a recent study on basically like segregation in the state of Arizona through the framework of YIMBYism and NIMBYism. And I can drop that in the chat. First of all, Mindy, I put in the chat a map to land parcels so that if you're ever curious about a land parcel, you can look at the zoning status of it. And I think that if you refine the search enough, you can also put information on like ownership, like tax assessor records, possibly. I might be wrong about that. But the study I did, I'm also going to drop that in the chat. It is in reference to NIMBYism, and the like official definition is not in my backyard, which Miranda already talked about. And it is an individual or community's unwillingness to accept large scale projects because they may affect things like property values or quality of life. And something that's interesting to me is that just like there's YIMBYism across a spectrum, NIMBYism also exists across the spectrum. And I think that the way that I personally found out about it was because I was attending community meetings and I was like, wow, I'm seeing people who are against inclusive development projects that I never would expect them to be against it, because they're people who express support for people who are economically or otherwise underinvested in. And so I was seeing people say things like, well, I don't want this development to happen because I'm concerned about loss of green space, or I'm concerned about heat island effect, or even people who are like on the left, very far left end of the spectrum saying like, we shouldn't even do this development if it's not going to help everyone. And by having this really black and white kind of all or nothing thinking, like people are falling into this hard no, rather than kind of seeing the gradient of yes that we could start to incrementally implement into our policies and efforts. So that's why I'm really excited to see Miranda doing this. I did want to ask, so I know your most recent effort was source of income protections, and I saw that it passed. So congratulations to all of us who participated in trying to get that passed, and also the people who couldn't attend, the people who are part of YIMBY Action and the coalition and contributed to it. Congrats to them. But I wanted to ask, do you have any like future steps that you kind of are planning on taking, or are you kind of waiting for the coalition to lead the way?
Yeah, I think it's kind of an organic process of seeing what's coming up and what kinds of conversations are happening. And, you know, especially in moments where I may notice an opportunity to kind of, you know, get curious about something and want to learn more, and then spread that knowledge. Like, oh, okay, well, what actually is the deal with this thing that people are saying is a problem? Like, let's look into it. Like, is there a way to break this down and like provide easy access? Like, here's all the links and things like that. So I think it's about seeing what's coming up next. You know, it's definitely locally focused, so on city and county level conversations. And some of our members, you know, some of our members are working within those areas. And so there's always kind of a sense of like, okay, well, you know, what they're going to be looking at upcoming, you know, what are the things that maybe fall into the area of like what we would be interested in terms of like promoting more housing. It's been a really interesting learning curve around like thinking that people were going to be all on board, and then realizing I would need to sort of explain like who we are. And I think that there's been pros and cons to having the YIMBY moniker, because some people make assumptions, but it's okay, like that's fine. I think the important thing is wanting to continue to have conversations and not shut people off. I think in a lot of spaces, where people hold privilege and they've had the ability to engage in conversations around around these issues for a long time, they hold a certain degree of expertise. But unfortunately, sometimes there's a sense of like, you don't know what you're talking about because you don't have the same level of experience that I do. And so how dare you disagree with me? Instead of a collaborative, like, you know, here's like my perspective and like, here's the way that I'm receiving what you're saying. And is there a way for us to both understand each other better instead of this sort of hierarchical gatekeeping kind of attitude? And so I also am really like, I don't really call things NIMBY. Like people, it's just too much. Like people get so defensive about it. It's just not productive. Nobody calls themselves a NIMBY. I got a little irritated when I saw SIMBY, sensible, in my backyard, because I was like, that implies we're not sensible. Like we're sensible. Like I'm a sensible person. Or public housing in my backyard. It's like, well, we agree with public housing. So like, that's not an issue either. So I'm really excited to read your paper, and yeah, it's just cool. It just feels like it's opening up the opportunity to have more conversations.
I did want to ask you, when people have assumptions, what do those look like? How do they express those assumptions to you?
So yeah, like at the Arizona Housing Supply Study Committee, I got up and said a thing for Tucson for Everyone. And when I went and sat back down, like the guy who did the presentation on manufactured homes, which was such a cool presentation, by the way, so interesting. But he was like, hey, he's like, you're not what I would have expected from YIMBY. Like they're not into rent control. And I'm like, well, we are. Like some chapters are. And so I think it's around things like that, just moments where it's like, aren't you all just a bunch of like white guy, like tech dudes? And it's like, no, like actually it was all women of color who like were the driving force of even like starting this as a real effort. Like literally every single like influencer I can think of is somebody who fits into that category. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, white dude tech influencers are the ones who invented hostile architecture. Like,
And they would.
Yeah. Would you mind speaking to a little bit Stop the Sweeps as well? Just kind of describing that and what some recent efforts.
Yeah, so this really came out of you know, Splinter Collective, like where they operate is very close to Esteban Park, which is home to an encampment. And there were just continued issues there. And we had also heard repeatedly that there were issues in Santa Rita Park with the same kinds of things, just abrupt like eviction notices, people feeling like, you know, they were going to get arrested and moved away, you know, just kind of like, okay, enough's enough. And so, so that's kind of where the impulse came from, to just sort of spread the word to folks like, hey, don't let this happen to our community members. This is messed up. Like you should actually be trying to connect folks with services and not getting rid of all of the crap, you know, in the middle of the night and being shady about what's happening. But that was a learning process actually, because in a recent case, an eviction notice was posted and a bunch of people called into the Ward 1 office and they were really angry. And like it ended up like getting rescinded and everybody got to stay because the Ward 1 office actually stepped in. And the whole problem was that the optics of the call to stop the sweeps by calling the council members made it sound like the Ward 1 office had called for this eviction. And it's like, no, that actually came from TPD. So they were getting people yelling at them and they're just like, we do care, we want to help. So I think what we learned in that case was to be a little bit more careful about the framing, and maybe figuring out a way to flip it to something more positive, like a call-in of like, please come to the aid of like these folks who are living outdoors and don't have access to regular running water and showers, and bathroom access was a huge deal that took months to implement and like actually get going on a regular basis. And so sort of a positive, like, hey, we know you care. So like, help us fix this. And here's how we can help you do that. So yeah, I think that it's a continued thing. I am unclear right now how many sweeps are still happening, but I know that it's something that is a big focus for folks. Yeah, Mark here was the person. Yeah, that presentation was so good, Joe. Like, it was just like, yeah, mobile homes, manufactured homes.
quickly speaking to that, I love that I ask everybody about co-ops, and Mark actually knows like how many mobile home co-ops there are and how they function with there. And like, I haven't gotten to talk to him about that, but I've seen pretty much that same presentation like 3 or 4 times now that he gives, and it's always good. I'm always really interested in that cooperative community ownership part of that. I wish we could have heard the rest of the meeting. I've streamed all those meetings, and the Flagstaff one was mostly audible. Tucson one was completely inaudible. Like, I saw you up there. I just have no idea what you said. Sorry.
It was like amazing, Joe. Like, you didn't see it, but it was absolutely incredible. Okay. That stream sucked, and it's so sad because mayor and council meetings are like so easy to watch, and like the audio is awesome. Well, so then it made me, your talk about cooperatives made me think about ROC, that organization that goes around and like helps like mobile parks, like helps the folks that are tenants gain ownership. The guy did a presentation at the Affordable Housing Summit a couple of years ago. I don't know. I feel like I never got a recording of it, but it was so interesting. And it was basically about going around and like talking to these mobile park tenants and like getting them to like be able to buy their own land and like build equity so that they could do that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that's cool. One of the things we were talking about in housing segregation subcommittee was that New York Times article about, I think it's called Anacostia, the area in Washington, D.C., and there was a whole big New York Times article about it. But one of the things was there's a community land trust helping form the co-ops to prevent the displacement as they are improving that neighborhood. So that was really interesting. And that whole New York Times article is really good. If you go to the CEHD, RCHD webpage, I think housing segregation put a link up there to it. So it's there. It's there too. If we were talking about NIMBYism, can I interject on that, Liz?
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Okay. So it's interesting that we've talked about NIMBYism and NIMBYism as this whole spectrum now. I think, I have, based on what I've heard from YIMBYs over the last few years, I have this core of what I think of as YIMBY policy. And maybe that's a misconception because, Miranda's trying to undo that and diversify that kind of suite of policies. But the interesting thing is, I feel like NIMBYism has almost lost all meaning too, because, when I first heard about NIMBYism, it was a lot of that kind of reaction that there's people we don't want in our neighborhood, which was traditionally a problem, and that was part of like OG NIMBYism. And when I've been going to meetings over the last few years, what I hear a lot of is like you were saying, people going, you know what, I really concerned about my property values, and that if this neighborhood is different, that the rate of change is going to be too fast. And like, I appreciate some of that on a degree that change should be gradual. Neighborhoods should have a degree of self-determination. There are mitigating factors where you say, hey, we've got a crisis, so we do need movement. But me and people I talk to who want to prioritize housing affordability and displacement get called left NIMBYs on Twitter every damn day. And it's the most annoying. Like, it's like, really? Like, I've had multiple conversations about public housing. I probably would be called a FIMBY, a public housing in my backyard kind of person. And I'm the person that's going to be like described as a NIMBY. It's tough. Everybody has a locally unwanted land use, right? A LULU, you know what I mean? And for like, nobody wants a landfill being built next to them. Nobody wants the freeway going through. Nobody wants a 24-hour warehouse with a bunch of semis moving in next to them. There are reasons for land use laws. There are reasons. Mike Edmonds has heard me give this in the context of exclusionary zoning. But there are locally unwanted land uses for everybody. There are things that there are reasons why land use and zoning exists. So like I agree with that, and I always try to, my thought is that I usually want to err on the side of letting communities self-determine, right? And my pushback against things like SB 2674 that created that Housing Supply Study Committee was that it was a statewide law that said, nope, this is what's allowable in your neighborhood now. And I don't think that works citywide, much less statewide. That's part of my pushback on get rid of R1, get rid of single family zoning too. Like, I think there are areas where single family zoning is fine and you can leave it. But, you know, I was driving down Broadway today and like, there's parcels right over by Elcon. It's like, man, there'd be some great multifamily housing right there. Elcon is, of course, notoriously overparked. I'm not somebody who wants to get rid of parking minimums either, but you look at that, Elcon's the worst. It's terrible. There's all that space where you could do something with it. So they're there. But then if you step back from Broadway on that stretch of road, you're in Colonia, Solana, or El Encanto, and you've got like historic homes that are built by Meredith Starkweather and Jocelyn and all these terrific architects that are like, they're more expensive than I'm gonna be able to live in like ever, but I appreciate that they're there, and I think that they're beautiful and they're part of our history, and I want that to be there too. So that's the definition of where which backyard starts is going to vary. And one of the articles from the International Journal of Urban and Regional Research, I think, was titled, okay, yes to what? You know, in kind of a YIMBY context. What are we saying yes to? Because I think what the backyard is matters, and I think what we're saying yes to also matters. And where it may be okay to say no, and where it may be okay to say, okay, maybe not right now, but okay, let's shoot for that gradual change that's inclusive and diversifying and is something that may be acceptable to other communities, to every community surrounding something. That's my thought. Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Miranda.
So when I talked at the committee thing, like that was one of the things I was like, we don't support, you know, SB 2764 or whatever. And the chair, who's the trash king of Phoenix, you know, he owns like the trash pickup.
Steve
I forget
Patterson,
his
yeah.
name. Anyways, he's like, well, it's turned into a study committee now, so like that's not happening anymore. And I was like, okay, just wanted to make sure.
Well, but if you've watched every meeting of that committee, you see, like, okay, when the CHD was started, I said, you know, I think we've got some people with institutional knowledge here, and it's good to have them around. Like, if we have questions about LIHTC or building, it would be good to have Jim Toffel or David Wohl as like an ex officio member. But I kind of feel like the CHD gets driven by the development interests at this point. Sorry. Not this committee, really, not housing segregation, but when I watch the general CHD meetings, it seems like it's driven by the agenda of the Affordable Housing Subcommittee, which is development driven. It doesn't, you know, I don't think it addresses the issues that we bring up that Jay has from Southwest Fair Housing and housing segregation. And I don't think it deals enough with housing first and what Liz and Mindy and Mike are talking about here either. The housing supply study committee is the same way with regards to composition. They took a body to talk about housing, and the most vocal members of it are Jay Kimmon, who's a lobbyist for Arizona multi-housing landlords, a lobbyist for the Central Arizona Home Builders Association, and a lobbyist for the Arizona Association of Realtors, who are all vested interests not in helping affordability, not in helping stop displacement. These are the organizations that come out against and lobby against things like source of income protection.
Yeah.
So that really frustrates me with that commission. And I want to see the CEHD not go that way. I want to see housing first and housing segregation take over. I wish that Affordable Housing Committee was a housing affordability committee, so we could talk about things other than capital A affordable housing, LIHTC. They want to break it down now and kind of talk about affordable home ownership and affordable renting, but I don't think we've talked about real solutions to rental affordability. And I have concerns that the affordable home ownership part isn't going to be, maybe, shall I say, collective enough for me, which is a code word, right? But yeah, that's kind of a hope I have for this body. I saw Mindy's hands up, so I'll shut up.
Thank you so much, Joe. We're running out of time, so I'm going to see if Miranda has any final words that she wants to bring up. And Mindy, if you want to, I'll give you Miranda's email address if you want to follow up with her by email.
I can follow up with a link to like the article that I referenced, and a couple other things that I may have referenced when I talked. And like, I just encourage folks to reach out if anything comes up that you have questions about. I definitely don't want to portray myself as thinking that I'm an expert on anything or anything like that. Like, I'm learning about this stuff, and I'm receptive to continuing to learn and engage in conversations. I think it's the way forward, is to collaborate and work out our differences and not shut each other off. So thanks for giving me the time.
Thank you so much, Miranda, and thanks everyone for such a valuable conversation. So the next agenda item is going to be our next steps. Any future agenda topics anyone would like to see? Does anyone have any future agenda topics they'd like to bring up? And I see your hands up.
My apologies, but I'm coming from a place of feeling pretty frustrated that we've had many meetings, and I'm not seeing enough movement and of change. I'm like ready to I'm not great at meetings and talking about conceptual things. I am really wanting to see Tucson start to really to do more with what we need to get the Tucson Heart Hospital in shape for a Housing First program. I think if we've got almost 23,000 people, 22,300 people homeless, at least we can, I can't even speak straight. I'm furious right now with how we are as a nation and what I am seeing with meetings after meetings and talking about, I'm just going to be quiet. I'm in LA, my father's declining. I'm a little bit triggered, I think, with going to see Skid Row soon. I am incensed with how we as a society are tolerating and continuing to keep dialogue going and not enough action to fix what, to build and to create and to help these wonderful human beings that are being marginalized because of their inability to get treatment or afford housing. So I think on the next agenda, it's like, I know that Tucson, the city of Tucson is doing a great job. I'm amazed that they are stepping into Housing First, where I think the responsibility lies more at the federal and state level of providing for our citizens that are vulnerable and endangered. So that if you can make any sense about with what I said, Liz, thank you. I'm going to be quiet now.
I'm totally hearing you, Mindy, and I understand this is frustrating for, I feel like easily 25% of our meetings are us just expressing how frustrated we feel. And, clearly you're not alone in that sentiment. If at any point anyone thinks of something that feels actionable to them that they want to be an agenda topic, I am 100% here for it. As y'all know, I try to create as much space as possible for like grassroots organizing. And I feel like our grassroots organizers are the people who are like taking those meaningful steps. And I think that's freaking cool. And I love that. And if at any point I have someone on an agenda that you want to get connected with so that you can start to take those steps, I will absolutely liaise. I will be that person supporting you through and through. So I will always try to provide resources on like anything that you guys bring up, so that if you think that a future agenda topic could be developed from that, I'm here for it. But like, frankly, these are meetings where we sit in a circle and talk. And so like, not a whole lot that productive is going to come out of it, but like, I'm 100% here to facilitate productivity as much as I can. So if you ever have a recommendation to like mayor and council or whatever, like we can do that through the commission. We can do that together.
I'd like
Joe,
to,
I see that. I'm sorry, go ahead, Min.
on the agenda for next month, I would love to talk about Tucson Heart Hospital. And
Okay, awesome.
who owns it? Why is it? Can we build some housing first in there?
Do you want to facilitate that conversation, Mindy?
No, I'm too shy.
I was kind of going to ask if it's possible, maybe it's time to have an update from Brandy on Housing First in general, but could we bring up to Brandy Champion perhaps working with HCD to let us know whether that heart hospital is something that's feasible? Maybe, you know, have staff look into that and find out whether that's an option, so that we know.
I totally support having Brandy at any and all meetings. The work that she does is a direct mirror to like what work we're going to need to do. I do think when we're going to talk about land parcels and land use, it would be more productive for us to ask a member of
PTSD.
planning. Yeah, I was like, what does that acronym stand for?
Planning
From
development.
planning, yeah, planning and development, to try and have one of
Services.
them attend, because I don't think Brandy is going to, she does more human services work from my understanding. I don't think that she does development of housing. Am I mistaken on that?
No, you're right.
Okay. So I totally support Brandy giving us updates so that it feels like a little bit less like an exercise in futility that we're meeting, and maybe we can hear a little bit more about what's been going on in the community and some positive outcomes. And then maybe we can hear a little bit from planning and development if we want to identify maybe 1 or 2 land parcels that we have interest in. Mike.
Yeah, that sounds like a good PDSD and HCD kind of combined effort. The other one I wanted to ask about was tenant protections that can keep people from becoming homeless and needing to enter Housing First programs. If there's anybody we know of that has a really good suite of tenant protection policies that could be recommendations from the CHD to mayor and council, I think that's under the purview of Housing First, is, you know, keeping people from homelessness.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's a supportive service that we could help people with, and that falls under the category of Housing First. I did contact the tenants union, and I had a meeting with Zyra. It sounds like there's a potential that all or part of it might be dissolving due to funding issues. So that's an unfortunate development. It does seem like we would be able to possibly work on maybe a set of principles or even an iterated list to present to the commission, and then through the commission, mayor and council. I think frankly that might be maybe the most effective use of our powers. So perhaps we can set aside some roundtables on tenant protections over the next couple of meetings. Mike, is your hands up?
Yeah, just had a brainstorming suggestion real quick. Since we had the source of income protection passed last night, I just throwing an idea out there. Could we maybe all brainstorm about how that relates to this particular subcommittee and future conversations or people to bring in? Just you know, just a thought.
That's an awesome idea, Mike. I totally support that. Maybe on our next agenda, when we have a roundtable about tenant protections, one of the first goals of ours could be addressing the application of source of income protections to better protect tenants.
Okay, I'll go with that. I'm just throwing it out there for everybody.
Yeah, I bring that up because I remember in our full commission meeting, there were a lot of questions about like, how is this going to be executed in a way that like actually protects people? So maybe we can put some effort into having that like a little bit more clear. All right, does anyone have anything else? Okay, thank you guys so much for your time. Our next meeting, it looks like it's going to be, oh, that's the day before thanks. Wait, no, I'm looking at October, right? No, it's September. Okay, October 26th at 4 p.m. All right, if no one has anything else. Our meeting's adjourned. Thank you guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Liz. Bye, everybody.